The family has decided you will not be attending the service.
Now go.
My father blocked the funeral home door and said my name was not on the family list. My mother stood beside him with dry, frozen eyes, while my sister looked at me as if I were a stranger who had come to stain the last day of farewell for our grandmother. I stood there in silence beneath the awning, wrapped in the scent of polished wood and white lilies. Outside, the rain fell in thin silver threads, skimming over the gray stone steps before breaking into cold splinters beneath the tips of my shoes. Through the glass, I could see my grandmother's portrait resting in the middle of a circle of flowers, her smile still soft and warm, the same smile she used to wear on quiet afternoons when she sat by the window folding handkerchiefs for me as a child. Only a few steps away. And yet in that moment, that distance felt as deep as an abyss. Martin Holloway, my father, a man who had always spoken like a judge delivering a sentence, gripped the door as though he were protecting the honor of the whole family from some terrible threat. He said I had not been there when the family needed me most. He said this was not the day for selfish performances. Denise, my mother, did not defend me. She did not ask a single question. She only lowered her eyes to the bouquet in my hands, as though my presence itself were a stain too ugly to ignore. Jenna tilted her head, her lips curving into that faint, cruel smile she always wore when she wanted to cut someone to pieces without ever raising her voice. She said I had always known how to turn other people's pain into a stage for myself. I wanted to speak. I wanted to scream in their faces that I was the one who answered the late-night calls from the care facility. I was the one who filled out every admission form, signed every consent paper, paid every bill that came crashing in like black waves that never stopped. I was the one who listened to my grandmother's strained breathing over the phone and swallowed my tears so I could tell her, in a steady voice, that everything would be all right. But my throat locked shut. Pain that deep does not burst out as sound at first. It freezes. Then later, it tears. A young staff member stood nearby, his face so full of discomfort it almost hurt to look at him. He glanced at me, then at my father, his hand tightening around the guest book until his knuckles turned white. I could tell he was waiting for a miracle, for a nod, for someone to step back and undo the cruelty of the moment. But no miracle came. I slowly set the bouquet down on a wooden chair against the wall. The white lilies trembled softly. I lifted my eyes and looked through the glass one last time. Inside, the organ had begun to play, low and sorrowful, like the sound of a door closing forever. My grandmother was truly gone. And my family had just decided to bury what was left of me with her. I turned and walked back into the parking lot. The rain struck my face like ice. Every step felt heavy, as though it were dragging my whole childhood behind me. Once I got into the car, I locked the doors and sat still, both hands resting on the steering wheel, unable to start the engine. I did not cry. Not yet. The humiliation was too fresh, still burning, sharp as a blade just pulled from fire. My phone began to vibrate. One payment confirmation email flashed across the screen. Then another. Then a long chain of receipts, contracts, and confirmations from the care facility, the funeral home, and the cemetery. The name of the person who had paid was clear in every line. Claire Holloway. I stared at the screen, and my heartbeat slowed. Then it turned cold. They had just shut me out of my grandmother's funeral. But every part of that funeral, from the hearse to the white ribbons, from the flower-soaked memorial room to the stone marker that would remain beneath the humid Georgia sky for years to come, had been built with my money, my signature, my sleepless nights. I was not the forgotten one. I was the one they were trying to erase from the story. I wiped the rain from my face, opened my laptop right there in the car, and created a new folder. I named it When They Rewrite Her. One by one, I dragged every email, every invoice, every message into it with fingers that had finally stopped shaking. Outside, the funeral bells began to ring, announcing that the service had started. Inside, my father was probably standing tall, wearing the posture of a dignified, grieving man. My mother was likely bowing her head at just the right angle to invite sympathy. Jenna was probably holding someone's hand, performing her delicate, polished sorrow for every watching eye. And I sat alone in my car, surrounded by the smell of damp leather and the steady drumming of rain against the roof, and I understood something at last. The cruelest part was not being kept outside those doors. The cruelest part was realizing that all these years, I had loved them like family, while they had only kept me around as a payment system that knew how to stay quiet. I did not go back to my parents' house after the funeral. I drove until the streets widened and the old oak trees thinned out, until the neat facades and trimmed hedges of my childhood gave way to a quieter part of Savannah where nobody knew my name and nobody expected me to fix what they had broken. The apartment I rented that night sat above a narrow bakery near the river. It was small, plain, and smelled faintly of flour, coffee, and old paint. The walls were bare. The kitchen light flickered once before settling into a weak yellow glow. There was no family portrait on the shelves, no inherited china, no shadow of obligation hanging in the air. For the first time in years, the silence around me belonged to no one else. I set my bag down on the floor and stood in the middle of the room, still wearing the black dress from the funeral, my damp coat clinging to my skin. My whole body felt hollowed out, as if the grief had scooped me clean from the inside and left only a shell standing upright through habit. I should have fallen apart then. I should have collapsed onto the floor and let the humiliation rip through me. Instead, I took out my laptop, placed it on the small wooden table by the window, and opened the folder again. When they rewrite her. The title looked sharper now. Less like pain. More like evidence. My phone lit up before I could even sit down. First came a message from Jenna. Do you have the login for the memorial slideshow? Account. Then another from my mother. The florist says there is a remaining balance and they cannot release the arrangement for the gravesite tomorrow. Then my father. Call me immediately. No apology. No explanation. No crack in their pride wide enough for truth to enter. Only problems. Only needs. Only the quiet expectation that I would once again step into the machinery and keep it running while they pretended I was not part of it. I sank into the chair and stared at the screen. Something inside me, something old and obedient and exhausted, tried to rise on instinct. Fix it, it whispered. Send the password. Make the call. Pay the balance. Keep the peace. That voice had ruled my life for years. It had cost me weekends, sleep, promotions, relationships, and pieces of myself so small I had not even noticed them disappearing. Then another message came in, this one from Ethan Cole. Are you safe? I looked at those two words for a long time before answering yes. He called immediately. His voice was low and steady, carrying none of the false softness my family used when they wanted something. He told me he had seen enough in his years around grief to know the difference between mourning and performance. What happened at the funeral, he said, was not sorrow. It was control wearing black. His words settled over me like a blanket I had not known I needed. I opened the chain of invoices again while we talked. The funeral transport. The printed programs. The upgraded casket lining my mother had chosen because she said appearances mattered. The cemetery deposit. The luncheon after the burial. My name sat beneath nearly every line like a secret signature hidden in plain sight. I began to remember with painful clarity how it had always happened. My mother forgetting to transfer money but asking me to handle it just this once. Jenna crying about being overwhelmed until I stepped in. My father speaking about duty as though it were something that only applied downward, never upward. None of them had ever asked what carrying all of it had done to me. They had only noticed when I was useful. By the time Ethan ended the call, the room had gone dark beyond the window. Reflections trembled in the river below like scattered pieces of silver. My phone buzzed again and again. On the table, each new message another hand reaching for me from a house I no longer wanted to enter. I did not answer. Instead, I changed every password connected to the funeral accounts. I moved the files to an encrypted drive. I forwarded copies of the payment records to my private email and printed the confirmation receipts at the little shop downstairs. Then I opened my emergency contact form from work, deleted my mother's name, and replaced it with Monica Reeves. The cursor blinked for a second before I clicked save. It was a small thing. So small that no one outside that dim apartment would have understood its weight. But when the page refreshed, I felt it in my chest like the clean cut of a blade through old rope. That was the night I understood the truth. My family did not miss me when I was gone. They missed the structure I had built beneath them. And for the first time in my life, I let them feel what it was like when that structure was no longer there. By the third day, the messages changed their shape. The anger thinned out first. Then the accusations. What remained was panic. My father no longer wrote like a man handing down judgment. He wrote like a man standing in rising water, trying not to sound afraid. The cemetery had not received the final transfer. The memorial luncheon invoice was still unsettled. The printer needed confirmation before releasing the thank you cards. My mother sent shorter messages, stripped of dignity, full of the brittle strain of someone trying to hold a crumbling wall upright with bare hands. Jenna, who had once spoken to me with polished contempt, now sent voice notes soaked in tears, saying she did not know where I had saved the photo archive for Grandma's tribute video. I read every message without answering. The silence I gave them was not theatrical. It was not revenge dressed up as wisdom. It was simply the first honest response I had given in years. They had built an entire family structure around the assumption that I would absorb impact, settle chaos, and disappear before anyone had to admit what I was worth. Now that I was gone, the truth was surfacing everywhere at once, ugly and undeniable. That morning, I sat across from Monica Reeves in a glass-walled conference room, overlooking the river. The sky outside was pale and silver, the kind of sky that made the whole city look scrubbed raw. Monica had a way of looking at people that made excuses die before they reached the air. She slid a budget packet across the table and asked me to walk the board through the end-of-quarter shortfall for one of our elder care programs. A week earlier, I might have stumbled through it with half my mind still tangled in family emergencies. That morning, I spoke with a clarity that startled even me. I laid out the numbers, the staffing gaps, the reimbursement delays, the unnecessary vendor leakage. I did not rush. I did not shrink. I watched men twice my age stop interrupting me. I watched Monica lean back, the smallest flicker of approval moving across her face. By the time I finished, the room had gone still in that rare way silence does when respect enters it. For one sharp, almost unbearable moment, I felt grief split down the middle. One half of me was still standing outside the funeral home door, drenched in rain, looking through glass at a family willing to erase me. The other half was here, in a clean room full of people who could hear my voice the first time I used it. After the meeting, Monica touched my elbow lightly and told me I should prepare for a regional leadership interview. She said I had been carrying people for so long that I had forgotten what it looked like to lead them in daylight. I almost laughed. Or cried. Maybe both. When I got back to my apartment, Ethan had sent me copies of the funeral paperwork I had requested. I spread them across the table one by one. There it was, in black ink and official letterhead, uglier than I had imagined. My father had instructed the funeral home to remove my name from the family acknowledgement section in the printed service materials. He had wanted the public story clean, dignified, controlled. A grieving family united in loss. No mention of the daughter whose money had paid for the flowers, the transport, the memorial room, the burial arrangements, the luncheon, the little polished details everyone would admire and no one would question. I stared at that page until my vision blurred. It was not enough for him to use me. He had needed to erase me too. My phone rang before I could steady myself. My Aunt Lorraine. She had always floated near the center of every family gathering like a woman who knew where all the bones were buried but preferred to call it grace. I nearly let it ring out. Then I answered. Her voice was softer than I expected. Older somehow. She asked me one careful question. Is it true that you were the one paying for your grandmother's care? I looked at the papers spread across the table, at my own name stamped over every sacrifice I had been trained to hide, and for a second I could not speak. Because that was the wound, wasn't it? Not that no one knew. But that so many had never thought to ask. Yes, I said at last. It is true. There was a pause on the other end, long enough for shame to enter it. Then she exhaled and told me people were beginning to talk. Not viciously. Not yet. But the details were no longer lining up. Too many small cracks had appeared in the story my father was trying to hold together. After we hung up, I stood by the window and watched dusk sink over the river. The water moved dark and heavy beneath the fading light, carrying reflections that shattered and reformed with every current. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my father calling directly. I let it ring. Then Jenna left a voicemail, her voice broken and high, saying Mom was falling apart, Dad was not sleeping, everything was spinning out of control, and I had to call back before things got worse. I listened to the message once, then set the phone face down on the table. The truth settled over me with a quiet so complete it felt holy. That house was not collapsing because I had abandoned it. It was collapsing because, for the first time, no one was left underneath it holding up the beams. My father came to my apartment just after sunset, carrying the smell of rain, cologne, and old authority. He stood outside my door with his jaw locked tight and his coat darkened at the shoulders, like a man who believed the storm itself had wronged him by making him wait. I knew the instant I opened the door that he had not come to apologize. Martin Holloway looked past me into the small apartment with a kind of contained disgust, as if the modest room, the narrow kitchen, the single lamp glowing beside my stack of files were proof that I had stepped beneath the level of the life he thought I should orbit forever. His eyes landed on me, then sharpened. You have made this family look monstrous, he said. Not hello, not how are you, not I should not have done what I did. Just that. For a moment I said nothing. The hallway light hummed above us. Somewhere below, a delivery truck rolled past on the street, its engine growling through the wet evening air. I could feel my own pulse in my throat, steady but hard, like a fist knocking from the inside. I stepped aside just enough to let him enter, not because he had earned the right, but because I wanted the truth in a room with walls around it. He walked in slowly, taking in the apartment with one sweeping glance. The old reflex rose in me before I could stop it, the reflex to make things less tense, to soften the edges, to offer a chair, a drink, a calmer beginning than he deserved. I crushed it before it could reach my mouth. He remained standing. People are talking, he said. Your Aunt Lorraine is calling relatives. Jenna is in hysterics. Your mother has barely slept. The whole town is circling this family like vultures. I looked at him and almost marveled at the precision of it. Not once had he said funeral. Not once had he said grandmother. Not once had he said pain. Only image. Reputation. Optics. He was not here because he had finally understood what he had done to me outside those glass doors. He was here because the story had slipped beyond his control, and he could not bear to stand in a room where he was no longer the author. You locked me out of Grandma's funeral, I said quietly. His face tightened. You were emotional. You always make things harder when they do not go your way. That sentence hit with the cold familiarity of an old bruise. It was the language he had used my whole life whenever I came too close to naming what he was doing. If I hurt, I was dramatic. If I remembered, I was bitter. If I resisted, I was unstable. He had always turned my pain into evidence against me. You told them I was absent, I said. You told them I was selfish. And while you were doing that, you were standing inside a funeral I paid for. He flinched then. Not much. Just enough. Grief makes people say things they should not, he replied. We were all under strain. Your grandmother had just died. There it was. The first pivot. Blame the grief. Blame the timing. Blame the moment. Anything but the choice. I walked to the table, opened my laptop, and turned the screen toward him. Folder after folder lined the display in neat rows. Invoices. Transfers. Admission records. Email chains. Signed confirmations. The cold architecture of truth. I clicked the first file. The room filled with the blue glow of numbers and names. Funeral transport. Memorial room deposit. Flower balance. Cemetery installment. Care facility charges. Medical coordination. Late night transfer authorization. My name sat beneath them all with brutal, simple clarity. Claire Holloway. He stared at the screen, and something flickered across his face. Not sorrow. Not remorse. Recognition. You kept records, he said. Yes, I answered. I had to. Someone in this family did. The words landed between us like glass. For the first time that night, his posture shifted. The moral outrage drained out of him, and something uglier came forward. Calculation. He lowered his voice and took one small step toward me, as though intimacy could still be used as leverage. You do understand, Claire, he said, that family matters should stay inside the family. I almost laughed. Inside the family. That sacred little phrase. The vault where every injury had been buried alive. The polished coffin where truth was laid down and told to stay quiet so everyone else could eat dinner in peace. Inside the family is where everything rotted, I said. His eyes hardened. If you keep this up, he said, people will start hearing things about you too. They will hear that you abandoned your grandmother in her final days. They will hear that you only care about money. They will hear that you are trying to exploit a private loss for attention. There it was. The second pivot. Not guilt. Threat. My fear came fast, hot, and bright. For 1 weak second, I was 12 again, standing in the kitchen. While he rewrote what had happened until I doubted my own memory. For 1 weak second, I could feel the old instinct to retreat, to explain, to plead my innocence to a man who had never needed facts to convict me. Then my gaze fell back to the screen. Rows of dates. Receipts. Signatures. Timestamps. Every silent night I had carried the weight of that family now stood there in orderly proof. He had raised me to disappear into labor so completely that he never imagined I might one day emerge holding evidence. That was the twist, though perhaps it had always been there. He thought I was the weakest person in the room because I had done the most unseen work. He had never understood that unseen work is still work. That the person holding the beams learns the structure better than the people living comfortably beneath it. That quiet people often know exactly where everything will collapse. You can say whatever you want, I told him. But if you come here again to threaten me, or to force me back into the role you built for me, I will send every document in this folder to the estate attorney, to the funeral director, and to anyone else who still believes your version of events. His face changed then. It did not crumble. Men like my father do not crumble where anyone can see it. But the certainty went out of him. The terrible old certainty that he could press down and I would bend. He moved as if he were going to touch my shoulder, maybe to reclaim the performance of fatherly authority, maybe to remind us both of an order he believed still existed. I stepped back before his hand reached me. Do not, I said. 2 words. Sharp. Clean. Final. For a long second, neither of us moved. Rain tapped against the window. The lamp beside the table cast a low amber circle over the paperwork, making the edges of each page glow like quiet fire. Then he straightened his coat, pulled himself back together, and walked to the door. At the threshold, he turned as if he wanted the last word, the closing verdict, the final command. But whatever he had brought with him had lost its force in that room. He left without saying anything at all. The door clicked shut. Only then did my knees weaken. I braced one hand against the table and let the shaking come. It moved through me in waves, deep and unsteady, the body's late confession after the mind has finished fighting. I was still afraid. Afraid of what he would say next. Afraid of what stories might spread. Afraid of how much of my old life would have to burn before anything honest could survive it. But beneath the fear, something stronger had taken root. For the first time in my life, I had not defended my worth to him. I had enforced it. A week later, the whole town gathered beneath strings of warm white lights in the courtyard of the Elder Care Foundation, where polished glasses chimed softly and voices drifted through the spring air like smoke. I stood at the edge of the entrance for one still second, one hand resting against the strap of my black bag, and felt the strange, quiet force of becoming visible in a place where no one had the power to shut a door in my face. 7 days earlier, I had been left outside my grandmother's funeral like a stain the family wanted erased. Tonight, my name was printed on the program. Claire Holloway, Regional Finance Director. The words had looked unreal when Monica first called to tell me. I had sat on the floor of my apartment with the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the river beyond the window, while her calm voice told me the board had voted unanimously. She said I had spent too many years carrying institutions without ever being named for the strength it took. Now I would be named. As I stepped into the courtyard, conversations shifted. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I felt it. The subtle turn of heads. The pause before recognition. The difference between being tolerated and being respected. Monica crossed the flagstone path in a deep navy dress, elegant and unhurried, and kissed my cheek before guiding me toward the front tables. "You earned this," she said. "Do not shrink tonight to make anyone else comfortable." Her words settled inside me with the warmth of a hand closing over ice. Then I saw them. My family stood near the far end of the courtyard beneath a magnolia tree wrapped in lights. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, as if the last week had quietly hollowed her out from the inside. Jenna wore pale silk and a fragile smile, but the nervous tapping of her fingers against her clutch betrayed her. My father stood between them in a charcoal suit, posture rigid, chin lifted just enough to suggest control he no longer possessed. They had come, no doubt, because this was the kind of public event where absence invited questions. They had come to be seen. To remain legible inside the social world that had begun slipping from their grasp. For one sharp moment, the old panic rose in me. My lungs tightened. The courtyard blurred at the edges. I was outside the funeral home again. I was 20 feet from a locked door and a father who could turn a crowd against me with one sentence. Then Ethan appeared at my side, carrying a tray card and that same grounded stillness that had steadied me the night everything broke open. He did not ask if I was all right. He simply stood there, letting me borrow the certainty in his silence until my breathing slowed. "You do not owe anyone the old version of you," he said quietly. I nodded. The program began. A quartet played near the fountain. Donors, physicians, administrators, and volunteers took their seats beneath the soft gold wash of hanging lights. Monica stepped to the podium first, speaking about dignity, care, and the invisible labor that sustains the final chapters of human life. Then she introduced me. When she said my name, the applause rose warm and immediate. I walked to the podium through a corridor of faces turned toward me, and with every step, I felt something lifting. Not the pain. That would take longer. Not the grief. That would never leave cleanly. But the old shame was loosening, thread by thread, because shame cannot survive long in a room where truth is welcomed. From the stage, I could see my family clearly. My mother's eyes were fixed on me with an expression I had waited years to see and no longer needed. Regret. Real regret. Jenna looked down first, unable to hold my gaze. My father stared straight ahead, jaw tight, as though even now he believed stillness could save him from being seen. I could have exposed everything then. I could have spoken their names into the microphone and let the whole town watch their polished image split apart. I could have recited the invoices, the lies, the locked doors, the shame. Instead, I looked out across the courtyard and began. There are people in every family, every hospital, every care center, every final season of life, I said, who become so reliable that others stop seeing them as people at all. They become systems. They become solutions. They become the ones who remember every form, every payment, every medication, every quiet emergency in the middle of the night. And because they do it without applause, the world often mistakes their silence for endless strength. The courtyard had gone completely still. I let my voice slow, soften, then deepen. But no human being was made to be used only at their point of usefulness. Care without gratitude becomes extraction. Duty without love becomes a cage. And sometimes the people who look the strongest are simply the ones who were never given permission to fall apart. I saw movement then. My mother lifting one trembling hand to her mouth. Jenna blinking hard, her carefully arranged poise cracking at the edges. Even my father shifted, just slightly, as though the words had found a place in him he could not armor fast enough. I did not look away. The greatest dignity we can offer one another, I said, is not praise after the damage is done. It is recognition while the weight is still being carried. When the applause came, it came slowly at first, then all at once, rising around me like rain after unbearable heat. I stepped back from the microphone and for one suspended second, beneath the lights and applause and night air heavy with jasmine, I felt my grandmother near me. Not in some ghostly way. In something simpler. In the straightening of my spine. In the steadiness of my hands. In the certainty that love should never require erasure. After the program ended, people came to speak with me. Board members. Volunteers. Donors. A nurse who said my remarks had made her cry in the kitchen during impossible overnight shifts. A widower who thanked me for saying aloud what caregivers so often swallow. Their kindness did not fix what had happened. But it stitched something back together in me that humiliation had tried to tear apart. Then Jenna approached. Her face was bare in a way I had never seen before, stripped of polish, stripped of performance. She said she had thought our father was only trying to keep the funeral calm. She said she had followed his lead because it was easier than questioning him. She said she had not understood how far it had gone until the silence afterward began exposing everything none of them had wanted to name. I listened. Then my mother came. Her voice shook as she said she was ashamed. Not embarrassed. Not upset. Ashamed. That word mattered. It had weight. It had blood in it. She said she had watched me be pushed out and told herself there would be time to fix it later. She said later had come too often in our family and changed nothing. At last, my father stood before me. Up close, he looked older than he had only a week before. Not broken. Not humbled enough to call it transformation. But weathered by the first real consequences of a life spent controlling the story. People are talking, he said quietly. I met his eyes. They are only connecting what they saw with what I stopped hiding, I said. He swallowed. For a moment I thought he might finally apologize. Perhaps part of him even wanted to. But some people cling to pride even as it drowns them. He gave the smallest nod, a gesture too thin to be redemption, then stepped back. I understood then that closure is not always an apology. Sometimes it is simply the moment you realize their limitations are no longer your prison. I looked at all three of them and spoke with a calm that surprised even me. I am not coming back, I said. I will not pay for what you refuse to face. I will not carry what you call love only when it is useful to you. If there is ever any relationship left between us, it will begin when you learn how to see me as a person, not a function. No one argued. That silence was the closest thing to truth my family had ever given me. Later, when the courtyard had emptied and the last of the glasses had been cleared away, I walked alone toward the river. The night air wrapped around me, soft and warm, carrying the distant hush of water moving through darkness. I took out my phone, opened the folder that had held every receipt, every message, every proof of what I had endured, and looked at it one last time. Then I deleted it. Not because I had forgiven them. Not because it had not happened. But because I no longer needed evidence to believe myself. I slipped the phone back into my bag and kept walking, the lights of the city trembling across the water like something broken turning beautiful in motion. And if you have ever been loved only for what you could carry, if you have ever been made invisible until your absence became impossible to ignore, tell me in the comments. I would love to hear your story. And if you believe silence can become strength, like this video, subscribe, and stay with Still Waters Payback for more stories where the truth rises slowly, but it rises all the same.